Hi, and welcome to Tech Leader TV. I'm your host, John Thomas Flynn, and this fall's show marks our 14th season of Tech Leader TV, a live streaming video webcast and cable television program. Of course, we come to you today, as we do every day, courtesy of our sponsors, Veeam, Advanced Onion, Akamai, Kerasoft, Symantec, FireEye, VMware, Granicus, CrowdStrike, and our Washington, D.C. partner, Federal News Network. We have another very exciting show today with a distinguished former California Assemblyman from the Inland Empire, the Honorable Lloyd Levine. However, before I introduce our guest, I'd like to take a few minutes, as frequent Tech Leader TV viewers will recall, to pontificate and report on pressing and interesting issues of the day. I promise to be brief, as we have much to cover with our guests, but I did want to reminisce a bit. It seems that it is the season for anniversaries, and I'd like to share a story of a couple, if I might. Just 1 year shy of a quarter century ago, this very meek, humble, introverted young man with a gleam in his eye and a bounce in his step descended upon Sacramento to take the helm as the state of California's first Chief Information Officer. I had just recently resigned as Massachusetts' first CIO, and now I had the awesome task before me of trying to help right the ship of state that was California's troubling management of its multi-billion-dollar IT investment. Coincidentally, just a few weeks ago, the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, NASCIO, celebrated its 50th anniversary at the Fall Conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was fun to be there to mark the occasion of my nearly quarter-century association with NASCIO as well. Let me share that story. A few weeks after I was appointed the top technology official in Massachusetts in 1993 by then-Governor Bill Weld, I received a call from Bradley Duggar. He held a similar position in Tennessee and was president of NASCIO's predecessor organization, the National Association of State Information Resource Executives, NASIRE. Duggar congratulated me on my appointment and invited me to join NASIRE, and then he proceeded to ask me if I would be NASIRE's Northeast Regional Officer. I agreed to that, and then without missing a beat, he asked if I would host the next conference in Boston, which I subsequently agreed to as well. That conference in 1994 was attended by about 30 state representatives and about twice that number of vendor sponsors and other officials, less than 100 in total. Such participation is a far cry from the organization that celebrated its half-century mark last month. Nashville's event was planned several years ago, prior to the hotel even being built, and attracted 48 state CIOs and 125 vendors for a total of almost 900 people, the most attendees in the association's history. NASCIO membership reflects a similar radical transportation since I joined. When I joined, there were no state CIOs within NASIRE's ranks. Most state officials were career employees, data center managers, and a few other joiners. In fact, when Governor Weld decided to reorganize Massachusetts IT and name me state CIO in 1994, I was arguably the first state CIO, though Michigan and one or two other states were adopting similar reorganizations at that time. At this 50th anniversary, all states now have a CIO who is appointed by their governor, and a dozen or more are members of the cabinet, the latter a number that increases with each election. It would include California, too, if Jerry Brown hadn't downgraded the technology agency 8 years ago, but I digress. While the NASCIO organization, the membership and popularity have changed significantly over the years, so too have the priorities facing state officials. While consolidation of state IT organizations continues to evolve, even today, the heady years of the mid to late 90s were rife with not only consolidation, but with outsourcing as well, fueled by popular books like Ted Gabler's and David Osborne's Reinventing Government in 1992. These and other voices sought to address growing budgetary deficits by introducing competitive government into heretofore monopolistic government functions. The results overall were mixed. But speaking of books, that's a nice segue into our next session in a few minutes with our guest today. As we like to say on this show, the state of California can always do better. So let's continue our journey today as we discuss government, politics, technology, and as I like to say, other unnatural acts. We'll be right back in a moment with our guest, and we'll get started. Hi, and welcome back to Tech Leader TV. Our guest today is the Honorable Lloyd Levine, former California Assemblyman, who represented in the Inland Empire, and currently serves as president of Filament Strategies and is a senior policy fellow at UC Riverside School of Public Policy. He was a founding board member of the California Emerging Technology Fund and a member of Governor Schwarzenegger's Broadband Task Force. Plus, he's currently working on a book about technology and government, which I can't wait to talk about. Lloyd, welcome to Tech Leader TV. It's great to have you.
My pleasure. Glad to be on.
As you may have heard, the 14th year, and this is our first legislature or former legislature, and we're excited about being able to talk to someone like you that won't get fired after he's been on the show, like some of my previous guests have all been nervous about. First, tell us a little bit about your background and experience. I know I mentioned the Inland Empire, but you say you're actually from LA.
Yeah, so, not to correct you on the air, but yes, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I went to UC Riverside for my undergraduate degree, came up to Sacramento, go to grad school, moved back to LA, and the district I represented was the northwest portion of the city of Los Angeles. But the Inland Empire is near and dear to my heart. I'm on the advisory board of the UC Riverside School of Public Policy. I'm a senior policy fellow there. I actually have 3 areas of the state. Sacramento, I live in Sacramento now, and I love it here. I love my home, and I love Riverside, so I think I'm a true Californian because I've been all over and can claim everywhere to be part of my home.
Sounds like a fan of Southwest Airlines to me, for sure, right?
Well, you don't know, my wife and I met on Southwest Airlines, and we got engaged on a Southwest Airlines flight, so yes, we love Southwest.
We should get it out there. You have an interesting local connection with your better half.
Yeah, my wife is Edie Lambert, the anchor woman on KCRA TV.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how'd you get interested in politics? That must be an interesting story.
Well, I hope it is. Otherwise, people might turn the channel. I grew up in politics. My dad was a political consultant. My grandfather was a union organizer. My great-grandfather was a union organizer. We, had dinner table conversations from as far back as I can remember, age appropriate, about the affairs of the day. All the way up through high school. It was just, it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do for a living. And to this day, I still tell people, even if it's not what you want to do for a living, government makes the rules we all live by. Civic participation should be something you do regardless of whether it's your vocation or not. And so I just grew up that way. And so I've always been interested in it, and eventually it did become my vocation.
Mm-hmm. I know when you were in the legislature, you had very strong interest in technology and telecom. Mm-hmm. Where did that interest come from? Before you were elected? Were you involved in technology at all, or telecom?
Not to the same degree. I always liked utilities, and it's not just telecom. I love electric utilities, and I know it's weird, but I love utilities. They make sense to me. I understand utility policy, except water. That one's really confusing. But when it comes to natural gas, electricity, broadband, cable, telecommunications, all of those, I love them. And maybe it's because when I got elected, I was 31, and I just always like to keep track of current technologies, and I understood them. And so even to this day, I'm a little older now, but I look at part of what I do is, just understanding the intersection, and this actually plays into the book that I'm working on, the intersection between technology and government, understanding, the function of the technology. I don't need to know how to code it. I need to know how it functions, how to apply it, how government can use it better. I advise clients who are in the tech space on, on how they can work with government a little bit better. And I love technology. The world is moving forward, and you just need to keep up. And again, that's kind of also the theme of my book, that mm-hmm. the world is moving forward and government needs to keep up too.
Mm-hmm. Well, since you brought up the utility thing, I've got to ask, and I spend a lot of time back in Washington, D.C. now with Federal News Network, interviewing CIOs from around the country now, while Tech Leader TV is more focused on the California market. But people ask me, why are all these electrical utility sites causing fires that they didn't seem to cause 3 or 4 years ago? What's happened?
I mean, they did cause them 3 years ago. You got to go back a little bit further before they caused the fires. There's a number of things that have all converged. Every year that goes by, the infrastructure is just that much older. You've got, because of forest management practices historically, you've got, and global warming, you now have more brush that's drier, the winds are stronger, immeasurably stronger. This is, according to meteorological data, the winds are stronger, so they're pushing fires quicker. You also have, and this isn't necessarily the cause of the fires per se, but you have development that is closer and closer to fire zones. So fires that perhaps were burning as large, but were nowhere near anything, didn't attract the media coverage that they once did. Firefighters would rush to put them out, but now these same fires are starting, and there are more homes and businesses in immediate peril because of the development proximity. So you've got stronger winds knocking down power lines onto drier grass, drier fuels, more fuels available closer to homes, and it is a recipe for disaster.
And forest management policies of the government and the utility?
That is changing. The utility doesn't really do forest management, but they do have in their general rate cases obligations for brush and line clearance, where they're supposed to go out and maintain safe zones around the brush. But I'll give you a good example. I mean, they do this, they're supposed to do this, but in the city of Los Angeles, we're going to take PG&E aside. PG&E is a hot button issue. There was just a fire down in the city of Los Angeles. They called it the Getty Fire because it started right near the Getty Center. That fire was in the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power territory, a municipal utility like SMUD here in Sacramento. That fire was caused by a tree branch. But here's the thing, that branch came from outside the clearance zone. So DWP did everything they were supposed to do, the lines were maintained, the lines were clear. That branch was blown by strong winds somewhere else onto the lines, knocked the lines down, and it caused a fire. So we need to recognize that even if we do everything we can, there still might be fires, and we may need to relook at where the clearance zones are given the stronger winds. So yes, there's a lot of problems with PG&E, but this is also a statewide problem that we need to look at, just given changing conditions that go back to proximity of things to the fires, drier brush and stronger winds.
Let's go to your time in the legislature. Again, you authored legislation involving siting of equipment on government property, and also the DIVCA. You can tell me what that acronym stands for.
We call it DIVCA. You can pronounce that one. DIVCA. And it's the Digital Infrastructure Video Competition Act. Doesn't everybody know?
Catchy.
That? Right, yes. And what do you want to do first? I can explain either one. And they're very similar, actually. They both were technical, comprehensive pieces of legislation that on the backside was the goal on the front side of speeding up deployment of high-speed communication. So when I was first elected, it was 2002, and we didn't quite have broadband the way we have it now, and we didn't have smartphones the way we have them now. We didn't have, iPhones didn't come out until 2007. Samsung didn't make their smartphone until a few years after that. So we were still on flip phones, maybe a BlackBerry, pagers, those sorts of things. And who among us didn't have the dropped call problem? And the Verizon commercial now even makes fun of that. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Can you hear me now? And we would shout into the phone on these things. And part of it was because we were having problems siting the equipment where it needed to be. And so my legislation created a process to allow the cell phone companies easier access to state facilities. They didn't want a discount. They wanted to pay fair market value, but they were having problems with siting. They would call, for example, they'd say, okay, look, there's a CHP office, hypothetically, in Fresno that would be perfect for a tower. They'd call the CHP office, and the CHP is like, well, call DGS. It's a contracting agency. They'd call DGS, and DGS would tell them to call somebody else, and consequently, things weren't happening. So we passed this bill, which then became the cornerstone of Governor Schwarzenegger's Broadband Task Force report to try and site high-speed communications equipment. So if you want me to keep going, you could fast forward to a few years later when there was one small issue that Verizon came to the legislature with down in Palm Springs, dealing with their expansion into video service. Verizon was a phone company. And because I was chair of the committee and because I keep up on technology anyway, I saw that little teeny problem that Verizon was having down there was going to be a giant statewide problem. And I didn't want, it's not that I didn't want, that sounds wrong. I didn't think it would be prudent to have Verizon and others come and have a legislative solution every time they had one small problem. Let's get a legislative fix. Let's get a legislative fix. We had 475 cities plus all the counties plus other jurisdictions, and every time they had a problem, we didn't need them coming here. So the DIVCA was a reworking of the regulatory framework, and it started from the principle that Comcast was regulated based on the fact that they were a cable company, and Verizon and AT&T were regulated under the premise that they were phone companies. But at the time of my legislation, they all provided voice, video, and data. So why are we having different regulatory frameworks? And they each had different problems. So we tried to smooth all that out, re-regulate everything in a way that was smart, made sense for the time and into the future, that sped up the deployment. And to pat myself on the back, it did speed up deployment, and in 10 years it was never amended. Nobody had to come back in and fix something.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that.
Well, as we discussed this before, that must have been excellent training for anticipation of the new mobile technology, 5G.
Right.
Particularly, well, not just particularly, but there's all aspects of it. But the one that caught my eye was over siting, because you mentioned maybe there was some, it was worked out with local governments previously. It seemed like there's a big battle going on. In fact, there's lawsuits, if I'm not mistaken, going on about where they're going to site some of the 5G modules, because there has to be so many of them.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that and what you think is going to come out of that whole controversy.
I think it'll be resolved. The one thing I've noticed in my career is technology never moves backwards. We never let a technological cat out of the proverbial bag and then put the cat back in the bag. So 5G is out there. It provides an amazing amount of flexibility, functionality, speed. It would have to be proven to be a disastrous technology for to even consider pulling it back in. So now we're not just fighting about, we're not going to fight whether it should be there, but how. And one of the things that in the cell phone discussions of the early 2000s that changed was the phone companies, I don't call it attitude, but the phone companies' perceptions, the way they did things. If you look now, you have a hard time seeing ugly cell phone towers, because they've done a much better job of disguising them, blending them in, shaping the technology. Drive up to Lake Tahoe here, and if you have a good eye, you can spot the one pine tree that's fake. But they've done a really good job disguising the pine tree in the pine forest. Or there was a one down, I still remember this because it was the example I used. It was off the 101 freeway, and it was a route that I would drive very frequently down in my district, and there was a building right next to the freeway, and they did a great job of designing the cell phone infrastructure to look like a sculpture on the side of the building. And so they've come up with innovative ways to disguise the technology and still achieve their ends, and I think that's ultimately where we'll go. There's always going to be the battles of the people who don't want it in their neighborhoods for whatever reason, but I think if you can disguise it, the functionality is going to outweigh the controversy very quickly.
Well, it seems to me from my view of the issue that the federal government has stepped in and basically said, we're going to take over the issue of siting. We're not going to allow local governments to preclude or prevent or extort money from the private sector to put these towers in place. And because there's so many of them, if I want to think there's got to be one every couple hundred feet or something, maybe less than that. You're talking about maybe 10,000 of these modules in LA, just as an example. And I think there's some issues in foreign countries now about the potential for some health issues surrounding that kind of technology. So it's I'm not sure. I don't think it's going back in the bag either. But it certainly is. There's a lot to be done before it's going to roll out. And the truth be told, regardless of the commercials you see on TV with 5G capabilities, most of it is still relying on 4G to get done. So it's still 5 or 10 years down the road, and we have plenty of time to.
And you still need the backhaul and the middle mile and all of the the infrastructure beneath to connect the 5G. The one thing I'll add to that is what the federal and this didn't win me any friends in local government, by the way, but what the federal government did is what DIVCA did. And I didn't get into that before because I wanted to focus on the consumer end and the deployment. But one of the problems was that, and I understand why. Let me start by saying I understand why local government would do what they were doing, but they were enacting what we would call the paint the mayor's house provision. Oh, you would like a permit? Sure. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, and you have to paint the mayor's house. It was, they didn't call it extortion, but they had a bite at the apple, and they were going to take as big a bite of that apple as they could because they're not going to get another bite for a while. So if Verizon wanted into a city, for example, that's what would happen. Or let's say Comcast or one of the other cable companies, had just spent 30, 40, 50 million to upgrade their system in an area, and they had to get a franchise renewal. They were suffering the same problem. They paint the mayor's house. Oh, you'd like your franchise renewal? There was one, and I'm now at liberty to say this. They told it to me confidentially during the discussion. It wasn't paint the mayor's house. It was buy us a boat for our lifeguards on the lake. Not a broadband boat, just we need a boat for the lifeguards, and you've got money and you want something from us, so we're going to go. So I get it. So what we did in DIVCA was we settled on local government can still control time, place, and manner of intrusions into the right-of-way. So they can do that, but they lost all of their ability to extort. And in the end, I think consumers win because we're getting technologies out there much faster this way.
Well, let's shift to some of the more interesting stuff, as I want to call it. As a former legislator, what was your impression, and you and your colleagues, about how the state was managing its billion-dollar IT investment?
I don't know that my colleagues had an impression, honestly, and I don't say that pejoratively. I say that when I was there, we were under term limits.
And what year was it?
I was elected in 2002 and served through the end of 2008. And we had in the Assembly very strict term limits, 6 years. And people, the public cares about a number of things, and yes, they ephemerally care about some other things. But when you talk to them about what they really care about, you go knock door to door trying to convince people to vote for you. Find it very quickly. Nobody brings up the state's IT procurement process. They care about education. They care about the potholes and traffic and what we call quality of life issues. But I also recognize there's 120, 119 other people there. I need to find my own path. I didn't have any background in education other than spending a lot of years in high school, college, and grad school. I didn't have any formal training or anything on that. And there's also at that time, and still education was a really hot topic. So I found my own path with my own areas that I really enjoyed, and that was technology and utilities. But I think the general legislator might have had a negative view, but didn't know what to do about it, and was really focused on, the other issues, the quality of life issues. Because as I like to say, if you and I are, and I used education, if you and I are running against each other, and let's say you got elected and you were a water policy person, and water policy in the state of California is a nightmare, and you are critically acclaimed by everybody in California as the genius who came in and spent 2 years studying it, working on it, meeting everybody, and then passed the most amazing thing ever. And I didn't do a whole lot of much, but I had like 15 or 20 education bills that ostensibly reformed education but didn't really do much. I'm going to win because these people care about education. Nobody cares about a reform of the state law. It's important to do. So, and I think the same applies. And it doesn't mean it's important to do. And I guess I'll end this on this, and that is, the perception of governing in the general population is different than the actual act of governing. 99.99999% of what we do is not gay marriage, it's not abortion, it is the nuts and bolts of managing the state, moving the state forward. And that's what it really is. There's a lot of moving parts that are unseen, that our job as legislators, as members of the executive team, executive branch, is to not let things fall apart so that these things that you don't usually see become noticeable.
Yeah. Primum non nocere. We chatted a little bit about this before, and I'll just maybe you could discuss it a little bit, and that's the whole issue of the Newsom administration. They've been there almost a year. What's your impression of their technology initiatives and what their plans are and what they're going to do, and kind of roll into that the DMV situation?
Sure.
Perhaps is a good example.
Yeah, no, I mean, overall, obviously I'm not there on a daily basis with the administration, so I don't know all of what's going on. I think they've done a good job. Generally, they rolled out this new Office of Digital Innovation, which holds great promise, and they're building that up. And I like the concept, and it's built after concepts that have been successfully employed in England and successfully employed in certain degrees in the federal government, and even to a limited degree here at the Department of Health Services in California. And they're taking that and expanding it. And I don't want to go too much detail on what ODI is, in part because it's not even fully formed yet. But I like the concept. I like where they're going with that, and if they're successful, it could be very transformative. I like what Governor Newsom did very early on. He came out and he announced a strike team for the DMV, which I think was great. And I've used in a speech that I gave once, I used that kind of concept of like, oh my God, Tesla has cars that drive and park themselves, and the DMV doesn't even take credit cards. They do now. But but that is how woefully bad we are at technology, and I understand some of the reasons behind it. Maybe we'll get into that in a few minutes. But I liked what he did. I liked the strike team approach to focus. We got to get in. We got to fix this. And I think he did a good job on that. Let's see where he goes with some of the other things. I think part of the challenge that he has is he was thrown this wildfire situation. And that is a huge problem, and he's very mindful of, Gray Davis got saddled by the first electricity crisis, and the governor has jumped out in front of this, owned it, and he said, I own this now, and is trying to get a handle on it. And it's a big challenge because there are no quick, easy answers to this. So that's consuming a lot of time and a lot of staff resources. He's also, he's been in there a year, but one of the things that I have heard is, and from the administration themselves, as we took over from a very successful governor, we are looking carefully at everything. We didn't take over from a Republican where we want to come in and change their people to our people, so to speak. So they're being very deliberative in, strategic about where they look, which directors they replace, which secretaries they're replacing, and the time frame. So I expect that their rollout is going to continue for another, 6 months to a year as they slowly get up to speed. And I think we'll hear, you got to remember, this is the governor who wrote Citizenville. And I think that's a good thing.
He's been on this program.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah.
Citizenville is important to him, and it's important to me too, in that we live in the state with Silicon Valley. We've got the Facebook, Twitter, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard. We've got some of the most major, Apple, most gigantic, largest, most important technology companies in the world are centered here in California, and yet at the state government and even city government levels, we are not keeping pace with the private sector on technology utilization, technology implementation.
And why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of reasons that go into it, and we're probably going to have to do this over three different shows.
We could. Let me throw out some of my thoughts, because we've covered DMV extensively over the last 6 or 7 months. And one of the things I said, as being a former state employee for 3 or 4 years, and I really got to see some of just taking a credit card. I tried to get credit cards. Do you know that the controller office spends like $20 million a year on postage because they don't pay people electronically? But those are the kind of little simple, low-hanging fruit that innovation could really address. But on DMV, I just think you have a workforce there that's just really concerned about what they do. And I think one of the things that comes to light every year or two, there's another article. Did you use the DMV office in the legislative offices? There's a DMV office dedicated to legislators, and there's also the fact that there's like 2 million.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, that kind of thing, and the fact that there's like 2 million secret license plates out there that members of the supposedly from public safety, but also from related issues, are able to have these secret license plates where they go through tolls they don't have to pay. They get a ticket, they don't have to pay it. Those kind of things.
I'm not familiar with that. I will tell you, when I was a legislator, I was offered, a choice between, a couple of different plates. I didn't choose the plates. You can get a plate with an A on it and your district number. I'm like, I don't really want my constituents knowing where I'm going and how fast I'm getting there, so I don't need that, thank you very much. But I can tell you flat out, I got a ticket when I was in the legislature. They didn't care. They pulled me over, LAPD, and I got a ticket. So I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but sometimes you hear these stories about things. I've never heard of secret license
I'll send
plates.
you the article on it.
Okay.
But anyway, I thought that had a lot to do with it, and I'm hoping that I tried to get Steve, is it Gordon, I think his name is? Steve Gordon?
The new
DMV director. I'm wondering if he has a chief information officer yet. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't deal a lot with the DMV.
Maybe we've got a few state folks here, but we'll hear at our reception afterwards. Maybe we can find out.
My dealings with them are renewing my license and my registration every so often.
Like most of us.
Right, exactly. And I can do
us.
that online, actually, so I'm pleased with that. But the other thing I'd say is, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, you do have a lot of really earnest, hardworking people there who are expected to deliver, and their job is to do their job, not to migrate computer systems and do all of these other things. And so, you have only so many employees and so many hours in the day to try and get everything done. And if you're pulling people away to go take a training or to take the computers down, then they're not able to manage the caseload. And there's a huge caseload at the DMV. So I mean, I don't want to lump it all there. We all know there's challenges, and they all know they need to be fixed. Things need to be fixed.
We actually figured out that October 1st of 2020 is when you have to have the real ID designation on your driver's license. And a couple of months ago, when this was brought up, a lot of stories,
by the way, just
or a
passport.
There were 28 million drivers, so there were like 14 months. This was a couple months ago. So DMV has to process 2 million people in their office each month for the next 12 months, and that's impossible. Yeah. It's never going to happen.
It's
so come next Thanksgiving, when Granny tries to get on a plane to come visit her grandchildren, hell's going to break loose.
It could be a problem. Yeah. No, I agree.
And Steve Gordon won't come on this program to talk about it.
Well, I don't know him, so I can't. And that actually is more than just his problem. That's it's a federal issue. The legislature might need to, come in with more funds to address the issue in the short term. Clearly, what they've got now is going to be insufficient to deal with this, but he can't do anything to manifest more people or more resources without help from the legislature and the governor.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe the White House, frankly.
Maybe the White House. And I don't want to be perceived as I don't want to be perceived as defending or being too harsh. I
don't think you are.
In my general approach to things, I try and be analytical. And yes, we all know there's problems at DMV, but there's also people who work there. And in anything, you've got to kind of assess the situation. And I feel like in a lot of these things, we live in a black and white world today. It's either everything's terrible or everything's great, and there's no room for, they did this really bad thing, but there's also this going on over here that might mitigate. And, anyway.
Well, let's see. We're running through our time schedule here. So let's talk. I understand you're writing a book.
I am.
Or you're editing, as
I'm
you call it.
Editing a book.
It's got a great title.
So, and as I said in the beginning, a lot of what I've done has led up to this book. And the book title is Technology versus Government: The Irresistible Force Meets the Immovable Object. And it's premised on why can't California get things right. And it's not just California. There's lots of governments who can't get things right when it comes to technology and, frankly, other things. And so the book is looking, and I guess I'll stop and say, the idea is that so many industries now have been completely decimated and transformed by technology. The recording industry, the newspaper industry, the magazine industry, they're all dramatically transformed. There are fewer shopping malls by magnitudes of hundreds in the United States today than there were because of Amazon. So you look around and you look at what's happening to all of these other industries, from the ability to buy things on your cell phone or pay with your cell phone, or there's just so many ways that we can't even list them all. The technology is completely transforming the world in which we live. And by and large, government has been immune to that, and in some cases inept. I just said I'm not going to bash people all the time, but LA Unified School District's purchase of those iPads was a debacle. There's been plenty of state government rollouts of computing systems and cost overruns that have just been almost indefensible. Kind of my question, the third thing I bring into that is we are right on the cusp of what I'm calling Generation T. You had Generation X, Gen Y, Gen Z. I don't know why they started at Gen X. They weren't thinking very far in advance when they did that. But Gen T is what I'm calling the technology generation. It is those people who have grown up completely surrounded by technology. And they're not quite yet in the workforce. You may think they are, but as I looked at the data and did the analysis, broadband didn't start to come into homes until 2002-ish in any kind of widespread basis. And it wasn't really in mainstream until about 2010. You've got iconography on billboards with the Facebook thumbs up and the Twitter logos. Those didn't come out until more recently. What happens when those people who have grown up completely surrounded by mobile phone technology at home, interact with the world entirely digitally? What happens when they enter a workforce in the state government that doesn't even come close to matching the technology they have at home or that they could go and use in a private sector job? What happens when their interactions with, whether it's with the DMV, as we just talked about, or so many other entities in state government, are technologically inferior to the interactions that they have in other places. So this book is looking at a variety of different subjects. I'm editing it, I set the theme, I'm writing the introduction, I'm working on some of the chapters, but other chapters are being written by experts in other areas, looking at things like, well, what does cryptocurrency and blockchain do to the central banking functions of federal governments, for example, or real estate transactions where it might allow you to go around some of these things. And so we're looking at a wide variety of impacts in how technology, government, and people interact with one another, and including some successes, I should say. We have the former president of Estonia, who's now a fellow at Stanford, is writing a chapter on e-Estonia, which is probably one of the most successful implementations of technology by a government.
Not familiar with it.
E-Estonia, we don't have time to go into it. But it was a very comprehensive rollout with security features as well, and it just top to bottom, very, very successful. You have to read the book.
I will for sure. Well, as I've said, actually not too long ago, I heard from Dan Walters at the B and now Cal Matters was asking me about why I thought the state has so many problems with information technology, and I said I felt all along that the biggest issue was having an executive champion, program person rather than a technology person driving the information technology project for their business. And I just feel it's in so many times, whether it's in the governor's office or whether it's in the agency head, department head, if that person isn't engaged and overseeing this work and just relying on the technology people to get it done, same thing's going to happen as happened over and over again. Because these projects are so big and they take so long.
Well, and that's part of the problem, though. I think we need to break the projects down into smaller subsets, not try and go so big, because that's cumbersome. And the other thing that I think we need, and it sounds stupid, but I think it gets lost sometimes, is look at the end user, whether that end user is a constituent, resident of California or the internal office user. Look at the functionality, and this is what I said earlier. I don't need to be a coder. I mean, coding is important. Obviously, you want to look at certain factors like what are you writing? Is it upgradable? How sustainable is what you're writing? The technology. You need to look at certain factors like the security. But you also need to look at the functionality and the use and figure out how are we going to do this in a way that allows an easy transition, an easy implementation. Way back when, and I've told this story before, way back when, before I was a legislator, when I was in grad school, I worked for an entity of the state. And the days that they would upgrade the computer system, people hated those. They had nothing to do, they couldn't do their jobs, they got behind on their things, but there wasn't that foresight. The IT department's like, well, we need to do this is our job, this is what's got to be done. Well, this side needs to meet this side, because you're right, this is your job, and you've got to upgrade it, but these people need to use these machines, and there needs to be a lot more integration. So I think there's a number of things that you touched on. We could go on this topic for a while, but we really need to figure it out, because if we don't, I'm wondering again, back to the book, what's going to happen in 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, when the people who are seniors in high school now, that's kind of the generation that I've said is really the cusp of the full Gen T, is seniors in high school, maybe freshmen in college when you look at their ages and things. What happens when they hit the workforce? What happens when they start fully integrating and working with government, and we forget some of the legacies and residual ways in the past? How is that all going to happen? I mean, just as a quick aside, like I remember when I was growing up, we had a phone that you dialed like that.
Sure.
In 50 years, nobody's going to know how to use that phone. Now, I have a smartphone. I'm very good at using it, but it's the same concept. We're going to forget where we came from. We're only going to have people who know where we are now, and they're going to look at government and be like, oh, I don't understand it. So something's going to have to give.
Well, putting your legislator hat back on again, what could the legislature do to help California agencies be more successful at IT? Because like when we started the conversation off, you said, well, I don't think there's that much interest in it because it's not a campaign issue, right?
Yeah.
But as I point out to him, say, yeah, but when you look at California's IT budget of $4 or $5 billion a year, which they don't really know because they have to take a survey to find out how much money they spend. That's how backward the state is. Although Fiscal is going to fix that, I'm told. But it's so. It's $5 billion, and if you count all the other departments that are involved in it on a multi-year basis, it's closer to 10, which would make it third or fourth largest budget in the state, frankly. And yet the concern about the spending is just, the legislature gets involved when something goes wrong, and then there's a hearing or two, and a couple heads roll maybe. And then they start over again 3 years. Like I just found out the other day that the Comptroller's Office is getting ready to start the Human Resource Project again, which bellied up under the John Chung a few years back. That one was called the 21st Century Project. But because it had so many delays on Tech Leader TV, we called it the 22nd Century Project. It's going to start again, and but she doesn't have to worry about it because it's going to take so long. She won't be in an office by the time it gets ready to convert over. So what do you think the legislature could do to help?
Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is I think you need to invert the process. You can't wait for the legislature. People have to go to the legislature and get their attention. This happens on so many issues every day that have nothing to do with technology. The legislators know what they know, and then people who know the rest of it have to bring it to them. So there has to be a concerted effort in some way, maybe led by the governor, maybe led by somebody in his administration, maybe led by the outside, to bring these issues and solutions. So that's the second thing I want to focus on is think about when you have conversations with people in the general public about technology. People have a hard time with it. And I know this is going to sound shocking to you. Legislators are people. And at the end of the day, legislators, they're smart people, but many of them have just as much trouble with technology as the rest of us do. Not the rest of us, as the rest of the world does. They have those same challenges. They've got so many things. They can't keep up with the latest iteration of this, that, and the other thing. They rely on people to do it for them. So we need to come to them with solutions, and I have some ideas. Like I said, breaking things down into smaller units to start with is a good way of approaching it. Looking at functionality, focusing on upgradability. Let's not focus just on where we are now. Let's focus on the fact that these are going to need to be upgraded, and let's build that into what we're buying now, so that we're not doing these multi-billion-dollar projects every couple of years. But I think, again, you can't rely on the legislature to do this, and that's not really a fault of theirs. That's just the way the government is functioning. They're focused on other things. Maybe there's somebody like me who may have some more interest, but by and large, we need to come to them to make them aware of the problem and make them aware of the solutions.
I only have a minute or two left, so I'll throw this out at you. I've been talking to a number of CIOs at the NASCIO conference around the country, and some right here at home. What do you think are the emerging technologies? And one of the big ones obviously has been cloud. Everybody's been talking about cloud for 5 or 10 years now. But there are new ones coming out.
By the way, you know about fog, right? No, seriously, fog is the low-hanging cloud.
Okay.
It increases speed by reducing latency for data that you need quickly. It's a new thing. Cloud is up here, fog is down here. So for example, let's think about self-driving cars. When self-driving cars are implemented and widespread, they need information faster than I can snap like that. So to send it to the cloud and back takes too long. It's the fog that is the new thing. I'm not kidding. You're laughing like I'm kidding, but these are the kinds of things that we're talking about now.
You just don't want to answer my question.
I do want to answer your question, but go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off, but I wanted you to be aware of that.
I'm just kidding. That's interesting. We're talking about the other emerging technologies that will have a huge impact.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, I think it will, and I'm gonna, one of the things that I've been working a lot on over the last however many years, I mean, going back to
only got about 30 seconds.
Sure, is broadband. We need to focus on increasing the bandwidth because all of these technologies, as I see them in the future, they're all going to require the swap of information. I mean, it's not just about a toothbrush anymore. Your toothbrush is a smart toothbrush and is connected to the internet. With the amount of information that's going to be necessary both for government and not for government, we're going to have to increase the bandwidth and increase the security. We have huge vulnerabilities if we don't make sure that what we're doing, whether it's smart grids, smart meters, whether all of that is, in addition to providing enough capacity, has enough security.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're going to have to conclude on that note. I want to thank you for being with us and tuning in. I also want to thank our sponsors for the show, and of course, thank our guest, Lloyd Levine. Some of the more provocative issues we hope to cover in our reception a little bit later. The voice on demand for this program should be available probably by tomorrow or Monday at the latest. We look forward to having you join us next time on Tech Leader TV. Until then, thank you very much for tuning in. I'm John Thomas Flynn. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. No, it's not.